So I think I'll start with an easy question,
Okay.
which is when did you first take on the label of artist? Where were you, and like what was going on at that time?
I was in Harlem. I was somewhere between 10 and 12, and I was an only child, which meant I kind of was left to my own resources to keep myself entertained. And I used to draw and draw and draw and draw. And then I started using tempera paints. And I enjoyed the process so much that even at that young age and with no role models or no path put out in front of me to go on, I decided I was going to be an artist. So, and I'm still at it.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you didn't actually like see Black women artists in
There
your.
weren't very many Black women artists that were publicly known. I'm sure that we have always done artwork, but as far as, seeing somebody down the block that did work, no. There just wasn't anybody.
And how did your family respond to this passion?
They thought the passion was fine, but the reality was a dead in the wood. Because then, as now, and the rate that this society is going for the rest of the time, being an artist is not financially stable. And I used to be kind of angry about that until I realized that as parents, you really want the best for your kids. And because my family weren't artists, they didn't quite understand the passion, but they did understand that, once you became of age, you had to go up in the world and support yourself, and the art wasn't going to do it.
So as you went on engaging in your art practice, did you feel like you had to do other things and kind of position art as like a hobby and have like a traditional
No,
type of career?
no.
Okay.
Only because I was unique in that I wasn't going for it, and it may or may not have been the best thing in the world, but I just wanted to do art. And then, worse than just wanting to do art, once I became like 17 or 18, I became aware of Africa, I became aware of my culture, and I only wanted to paint Black people. So that presented a problem because when you go to school, you are taught the traditional European everything. And I felt that I was fighting on so many fronts in my life, I didn't want to fight on the art front too. And so I had gone to City College for like at night. I had thought about going to college, but then when I saw the curriculum, I said, this don't have nothing to do with me. So that's how I ended up at the Art Students League. Because there, in those days, and in these days too, you can choose who you want to learn from. And that is why I ended up with Jacob Lawrence, Charles Austin, Al Hollingsworth, Richard Mayhew, who's still alive today. Uh, somebody out. But anyhow, that's why I chose to go there because I knew that those men were artists and they would definitely understand where I was coming from. So.
And you said around 17, 18, you started to learn about Africa and Black people. Like, what was it that exposed you to those ideas?
I was still living at home at the time, and I found a volunteer job working at the public school down the block from my house. And one day the director came in and said, because he knew I was an artist, I was, I think those are my first teaching experiences. He said, there's a group of artists on the St. Nicholas Projects who are putting up art shows every weekend. It probably was August. That was August of '65. And of course, I was there. As soon as that weekend came, I was there. And from those artists, that's where I got my history of my own people, where I was introduced to all things Africa, and I evolved from there.
That's awesome. And was there a certain point when your art felt like it became more political? Like, did it ever have that feeling for you, or has it always been just like a passion to make art, or was there anything attached to it as far as like trying to make a statement?
I think because at the time, that's what we did. We made statements because the statements weren't being made in the overall society. Our history wasn't discussed. Our issues weren't very much discussed. And so, as well as having a practice where I just painted and drew people, I also would put in my art whatever was going on in my life. The Black Arts Movement at that time was in full steam. And so we just went with the flow.
And for those who might not be familiar with the Black Arts Movement, can you tell us a little bit about what that was?
Well,
like, take us back.
It was a really, really exciting time because we were denied a larger audience. We focused on ourselves, and most of us, because of our mindset, we really wanted Black art for Black people, because at the time nobody else was buying it or interested. It was only, and it was a way of us taking our culture and trying to make it just as valid as anybody else's.
Right. Right. So how did you end up being a part of Weusi?
Because, like I said, that was a couple of days before my 17th birthday. Mr. White, that was the director's name, told me to go over there. So I went over there. And I loved what I saw, and the artists were very open. And at that time, there was a lot of women and there were a lot of men, but somehow, by the time, I guess, the winter came, the women kind of disappeared. And we were left with the men artists and me. And it stayed that way for a while.
Yeah, because I mean, everything I've seen, it seems like it was a very male-dominated group.
It was, and still is. Recently, because Weusi is still functioning. I mean, 2 years ago, we began getting other members in who happen to be women, so things have changed. But in their 50-year history, I think Kay was the only other woman who came on board as part of a full member of Weusi. And then, because of the fact that we as women were having troubles, like after you left the cocoon of Weusi, trying to get an exhibition on your own, you were faced with people telling you, well, you're not going to be an artist, you're just doing this to pass time or whatever. They kind of made light of you and didn't take you seriously and wouldn't let you exhibit. And so myself, Kay Brown, and Faith Ringgold at the time, I don't remember the circumstances or how it happened, but we got to talking, as people do. And we said, well, where's all the other artists? And we knew that there were some, we just didn't know who or where they were. So we decided to call a meeting, and each of the three of us would contact every Black woman artist that she knew. So that's what we did. And it turned out that that first meeting happened at my studio at the time, which was on the Lower East Side on East 2nd Street. It was a 5-floor walk-up. It was dark because the lights was out. It was one of those slum landlord type of situations. There was water dripping down, all of that. I don't know if I would have went up them 5 flights, but maybe I would have, because the goal was in a very important connecting with other women artists, so I probably would have. But I thought they were all really brave to do that. And so we had a meeting, and somehow during the course of the meeting, we said that, well, since one of our problems is exhibiting, why don't we pool our resources and have an exhibition? Nigel Jackson had a gallery at 15 Charles Street in the Village, and he was a Black man who had a Black gallery, and he had allowed me to show there only because Ellsworth Orsby, who is another artist, he went to Nigel and told Nigel that I was serious, and he sort of validated me. So Nigel let me be in the exhibition. I probably sold some work, which means Nigel said, oh, this might work. So that's what happened.
And that's the story of how Where We At began?
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, yeah.
So I'm really curious about this because I'm really fascinated by all these different collectives that were started in the 70s. Like, were there any, like when you had that first meeting, were there any moments of tension or conflict around like goals or finances? Like, how did you work through creating that collective? Because just speaking from personal experience, like I know that being part of a collective is not easy because you have so many different personalities, especially with artists who tend to be very sensitive and very
opinionated.
You know, and I feel like to be part of a collective requires some moments of compromise and flexibility. So how did you manage the social dynamics, I guess is my question.
I think initially we were just happy to just be together. And as you said, being in a collective is not easy because you have all these different personalities with all these different ideas. There were fights. Oh, definitely fights. But at the end of the day, I think the overall goal was we sort of had to stick together in order to get things done. As individuals, we weren't as strong, but as a group, then we presented a real force. And the unique thing about where we at is that we weren't only visual artists. We were poets, writers, musicians, businesswomen. Some people were teachers. We had a wide range of occupations.
Oh, wow.
So, and because of that, we were able to get the 501c3 because some of our women were really astute business people. They were superb. And they focused, because you know, as artists, sometimes we don't always focus on the business end of things.
Don't I know it?
They made us focus on the business end of things. And somehow it was basically Priscilla Taylor, who passed way too young, and who was also one of the first serious textile artists that I met. But she was also a superb business person. And she was the one who pulled all the papers and, you know, all the legal requirements for us to get that 501c3.
And the purpose of the 501c3 was to get funding?
Yeah, it was to get funding. We had a dream of getting a building. That didn't happen because we wanted to have a building with artist studios where we could have our own workshops and where the community could come to us.
Wow.
That did not work. And then it also, we did the 501c3 so that we can get funding for other things like teaching. We ended up teaching in jails, we taught in community centers, we got work in schools, and also we did a mural at 54 Fairman Avenue, that's in Bushwick, and it was a 6-story mural. I designed it. It was the first mural that I wasn't allowed to get on the scaffolding to paint because I had done murals before that, but not with where we at with City Arts, which was a very vibrant mural group coming out of the Lower East Side. They put murals all over the Lower East Side and different parts of New York. They were, you know, and then, yeah, so we did the mural. The mural stayed up there for like 10 years. And then one day I went to visit it and it was all over. And unfortunately, that's what New York does. I currently live in Philadelphia. And not only do they have a major mural arts program, they have the money and the wherewithal to realize that once a mural is up, it has to be taken care of.
Yeah.
And then, like here, you can do a mural. These murals were huge. They were the size of buildings. And it'd be up there forever, and then one day you would come and it was a white wall where your wonderful artwork used to be because the landlord would change or whatever. So, and I think in New York it's probably still like that to this day.
Yeah. Yeah, the landlords just come and cover it up.
They come and they don't have an appreciation for the aesthetic value or even for the financial value of the work and just paint it over.
Yeah, yeah. And you said you also taught in prisons? Wow, how was that?
Probably one of the best teaching experiences that I had. Only because myself and Empress Akweke, she became a president of where we at some point. We were sent to Bedford Hills, and we worked with the Long-Term Risk Committee. This was a group that had a space. The woman who was running that program was very pro-woman and pro-artist and pro-prisoner because she managed to get them killed. And with that kill, they would make all kinds of ceramic pieces that they displayed in the visitors room.
Amazing.
So that it could be sold, and then the woman would get that money, and then she would have money to send home to her family through her art initiative.
That's
So that was
incredible.
important. And it was because we didn't participate. Well, I learned ceramics there from them, but we taught jewelry making, painting and drawing, and other stuff. So it's sort of like supplemented our program.
Wow. And so where does Where We At stand now? Like, you know, if I had a friend as myself, the friend is me, who wanted to join the collective, like, is that something that can happen?
No, because we are not functioning as a collective.
Okay.
We're functioning as a group of women who had an amazing collective, and most of us are not here anymore. And that's why this exhibition is up. We have come to a time in history where women's art is no longer thrown to the back of the bus. It's being shown, it's being appreciated, people are talking about it, people are buying it. And so I thought, well, you know, we were at this way before most of these people were born. Why shouldn't we have an exhibition?
Yes.
So we got 2 exhibitions. And I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So we might decide we want to stay together, or we might just continue to exhibit occasionally as a group.
Okay. Okay. So this exhibition, just so y'all know, these are all Where We At members. And then the fans in the back are those who have passed. And then there's another exhibition at Weeksville Heritage Center that also features Where We At pieces.
Right.
So I have another question about Where We At. Like, when y'all first came together and through the tenure of your time of being together, did you identify as a feminist organization or a feminist collective?
No, because when we started in '71, feminism was a bad word.
Okay.
Because from the way that we looked at feminists, they were a group of predominantly white women artists who were socially or financially fairly well off, and they were angry because their husbands wouldn't allow them to be artists. And also because some of the artwork that we saw was a little bit on the gross side. And
Gross?
Gross in that it was very, not everybody now, but some of the pieces were just overly sexual, and it was just weird. And so our focus and the work that came out of that group was very family orientated.
Okay.
We focused on either the problems, the racism, the sexism, etc., that we were having, or we just painted pictures of people we knew or loved or whatever. So it was different. It wasn't that grossness that at that particular time. Now, as time went on, feminism took on a broader meaning, but when it first came out, we said, oh, no. So.
Okay. Okay. So if someone categorized Where We At as a feminist arts collective, they would be incorrect.
Yeah, although they would be somewhat correct, but first you got to define feminism.
Right.
Because everybody's got a different explanation.
That's true.
In my mind, feminism is also equated with womanism, which I consider myself more because I think that describes what I'm doing better. And feminism to me should mean the exploration of women's values, arts, ideas, abilities, and that the door should be open so that any woman should be able to do anything in the world she feels like it. There shouldn't be a thing of, well, okay, you can't be a musician because that's all men. Or you can't do this because that's all men. We should be able to do anything. And also we should be able to get paid just like men do.
Right.
So it's all those issues which at the beginning, when they started with feminism, I don't know exactly what they meant, but that's how I take feminism to mean. Pro-woman, somebody who's interested in the activities, the history, and make sure that that's put out in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I have a few more questions, and then I'm going to ask Essie's questions, and then we're going to take questions from y'all. But I'm curious, because we talked a little bit about them, but I would like to talk about your process a little bit more. So what is your favorite thing to make?
What I did yesterday.
Oh, what was that?
The Blues Queens, which this is the Blues Queens. This is the second piece in that series, and it started probably 10 years ago when part of my subject matter for the art.
I think I've seen this, Pete.
No, you haven't, because I just finished it.
Well,
but I did finish. You may have seen the first one. It was a sculpture.
A column.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
That was the first one, and I don't know if I started out wanting to do a fiber piece that was sculpture, but that's what it ended up being. And so that piece, I made that one. But the start of it is like, my subject matter would be women, and it would also be musicians. Over the years, I found out, maybe like 10, 15 years ago, there were all these groups of women musicians who arose up out of the sand in like the 30s and 40s, probably because the men had gone to war. And women weren't supposed to be musicians, but then somebody had to play the music. So women were allowed to function as musicians. There were bands, so forth and so on. I always loved Ma Rainey. And one day I picked up a book and started researching women who did the blues, particularly from that era. And then I found there was a whole bunch of them. So I said, well, nobody knows about this. And this, this is something that I want to do. So that's why in the first Blues Queens, I have Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, a lot of the people that people sort of know. But then the piece that I just finished, I tried to focus more on people that nobody ever heard of, because there were so many of us, or so many of them. And then these were the first women that I identified as Black women artists, because they were musicians, which is still an artist. And the thing that really amazed me about them is that they were very in your face, bodacious. Some of them were gay, and they just were themselves, and they were artists, and they made money. A lot of those women had substantial careers. Some of them actually turned around and would do things for the community with the money that they made.
Yeah.
So that's why, and then even at this point, I keep discovering women, because the more I research, then there's somebody else. And the sad thing about the research is that a lot of these women, there's no birth date, because they didn't keep track of us back in the late 1800s. And then some of them simply vanished in the time. They don't have a death date or what happened to them or anything. That's why keeping and recording our history is so important.
Yeah, definitely. I remember going to your exhibit at a gallery in the Lower East Side and seeing the blues.
That was
piece.
my first formal one-woman show at the Friedman Gallery.
Exactly. Yeah. That was a beautiful show.
Yeah, thank you.
And I was captivated by the blues piece with the video.
Yes, that was Ilya, who is the owner of Friedman Gallery. He thought that one up, and I said, that's perfect, because you have the piece, and then you have the visuals of the actual women who did that. It was perfect.
Yeah, it was. It was a perfect show. I still have all the pictures in my phone. I didn't know I was going to meet you then, which is it's amazing. Like, life is so funny, because I was like obsessed with your work, especially because I find it to be so filled with texture and also three-dimensional, you know, so you can't just like, some things you might be able to just like put up on a wall, but then some things you have to suspend because you want to look at all, both sides and underneath and everything like that. So when you're working on a piece, what's the process like? Like, do you already have an image in your mind of what it's going to look like, or do you just kind of wing it and just work intuitively until an item comes together?
Yeah, I usually have a vague idea, but in my mind, if I knew exactly what it was going to look like, and why am I doing it? Because it's not fun, and it's not a challenge. The fun and the enjoyment of the work comes as you're working. Things come to you, things I may not have thought about. Like, for example, the piece that I just finished, instead of making the Blues Queens a sculpture, it's like, I think there's 13 pieces to it. 7 of the pieces are portraits, and then in between each portrait is what I call a dangly with other women's names who weren't included in the major piece. The dangly part wasn't part of the plan, but what had happened was I had embroidered, because I have an embroidery machine that I use to embroider type, because I wanted to be able to be specific and be direct in my message and my work. So one of the ways to do that is to write what's going on it. So I had this pile of names in Philadelphia. And I said, you know, you did a lot of work with that pile of names and you just leaving it over there? So I brought it to the Bronx where the rest of the piece was. And somehow I just started looking at it and I said, you know, why don't you just try and hang one from there and then hang another one? And I made one dangly and I said, that's it. That made the piece. That changed everything. But that wasn't part of the plan. I think for myself, some artists will sit down and they'll draw out every little line that a piece is supposed to have. But like I said, that would kill the fun for me. The fun and the challenge for me as an artist is starting with a blank slate and making something happen. And so 90% of the time it do happen. When it don't happen, I go take a walk.
Yeah.
You know, and everything is organic and it's a process. And then sometimes things may not be working out in a piece right now. I'll just put it aside and go work on another piece. And whenever I get back to it, I'm refreshed and I might have a new idea and then I could continue.
That's awesome. I would love to ask you a little bit more about process. I'm curious if you have any like suggestions or insight into, or if you've ever even encountered this artist block where you want to make things, but you don't necessarily have an idea of what you want to make. Like, have you ever experienced that?
Very rarely.
Okay.
That's just very rarely happen because there's just so many ideas out there. Sometimes it's hard to say, okay, so which one should I do? Should this one? Should that one?
How do you pick which one to focus on?
It depends on what I'm interested in at the time. Sometimes it might be because I'm getting ready to do an exhibition that has a theme, so I need to have a piece of work that kind of follows that theme. That helps. But other than that, you know, it's just we'll see what happens.
Yeah, yeah. So what would you say have been the challenges, if not for a lack of ideas? You have an abundance of ideas. What do you think has been the most challenging part of being a legendary Black woman artist?
Time. Because in the world I live in, I wouldn't do anything but get up and start working. But you know, I do have to function, I do have to pay bills, I do have to interact with people, I do have to try and help other people sometimes. So I just can't stay in the studio, because if you leave it to me, I would never come out. So it's a matter of time, of how much time. First, it's still, because I've had children and I've managed to create art throughout my years when I was sort of a stay-at-home mother, but I wasn't staying home. I was staying home and working, and then working hundreds of odd jobs in order to, you know, make ends meet. And even as an older person, you know, they say that you're older, you're retired, so you should have plenty of time. But that's not the life that I live. And a lot of times I have to say, no, I'm not going to do this. No, I'm not doing this. No, I'm not going there. And then I have to figure out time management. Like when I was supposed to come visit you on Tuesday, I was still in the middle of writing a grant. So I said, well, why did you choose to go out there on Tuesday? You should have just went out there on Wednesday, and then Wednesday will be my out day.
Right.
And I can get everything done I need to done on Wednesday instead of breaking into my studio time on Tuesday. So, and this is what just happened. So I have to constantly be thinking, okay, this is your calendar. Put everything that involves going out into the world on 1 or 2 days or whatever, and then the rest of the time is your studio time. And on the days where I have studio time, I try not to even leave the house. Because once you leave the house, anything can happen.
That's a fact.
So, and then sometimes you plan to do one thing, and before you know it, it's afternoon.
Right.
And, it might be evening. And as you get older, you have a lot of energy, but not the same energy that I had when I was 30. At 30, I could stay up for 2 or 3 days and get up and go to work the next day. But at this age, I can stay up for 1 day, but on that second day, I better be somewhere near the bed. So my body will revolt.
Right,
You know, so.
right. Well, you talked about being a mom, which is something I can relate to. And did you find it difficult to balance being a mom and being an artist? Like, was that a challenge?
Yes and no, particularly when the kids are very, very young. But as they got older, they had their own interests. And then, interesting enough, one of the things that Where We At was really good with is everybody sending the kids over to my house. Because I think I was like the only one that didn't have a real job, so my schedule was flexible. So when the kids came to my house, all the kids went in that room, and then that means I was free to do my art. So that's how I did it. And I think because my kids, when they were born, I was an artist. That makes it a little different because I've seen situations with women, sometimes women with husbands, like the woman will be in a marriage and then maybe about the 10th year or whatever of the marriage, she decides she wants to be an artist and she gets some pushback from that. She may get pushback from the kids, she may get pushback from the husband. But if they were born in that environment, they think that everybody lives like this and everybody does this. So there's really no separation, so there's a lot more support.
Yeah.
One of my kids is an artist. The other one is, I do believe she's going to write a novel in another year or two. So, and you never know what you get being an artist because like most parents, you don't force this on them, but sometimes just the environment and they find that they love it or they have talent and they want to pursue it or not because I believe, still believe, I told my children, you have to do in this life what it is that makes you feel empowered, human, that gives you a reason to get up for it. That may or may not be art.
Right.
So, and that's what they did.
That's awesome that you encourage that because even like you said earlier, I feel like even still in 2024, people don't necessarily encourage their children to be artists because they feel like financially it won't be sustainable.
True.
So I appreciate that you still encourage your kids to go for it.
And I think Spike Lee was one who said the artist's worst enemy is the parent, is the parent that's not supportive. Because of the lens in America is not really clearly focused, art is a gazillion-dollar business. We don't have a big enough part of it, although we're getting a part of it. And I actually know artists these days who are very well off through the sales of their work.
Me
But
too.
then I also know a whole bunch more that are barely making it from day to day. So.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I know a lot of art stars who are doing extremely well financially, and then I know people who are struggling. And I just wonder, and both are super talented, so sometimes it just feels like being in the right place at the right time or just the luck of the draw, knowing the right people, like it just feels very
happenstance.
Yes.
Yeah. And I firmly believe that any artist can be successful, but what you need somebody who believes in you. You need somebody who's a salesperson and who can sell. Because as you see, some of the artwork out there is horrible. But some of those people are making really good money because the people behind them found somebody out there that would buy it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the secrets, finding somebody who is able to sell your work.
Yes, exactly. So you have representation and all that fancy stuff.
Yeah. After 50-something years, yeah. Before that, I was representing myself.
Okay. And that was complicated, I'm sure.
Complicated, but doable, because it's a business. So I was like an entrepreneur, small business owner.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to look at Essie's questions now.
Whatever you want to because there's other.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions?
What are some of the ways that helped or pushed you to start organizing? What were some of the things you have learned from other groups?
Well, I mean, I would say it's for both of you too.
Oh, these questions are for both of us?
Yeah, and I'd like to ask you a couple of questions.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Art is so important. That's why, like, it was actually Jasmine that was like, Ola. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's great. Both of them are Black women who have created or founded some sort of, something that they felt was missing and that they needed in their lives. And I think it's true also of the history of the printmaking workshop. So I guess, like, if you guys can, like, that was for me a question of like, what makes someone create a collective, or find a collective, or what you've done with the Free Black Women's Library, which is like create an access for people, and so.
Okay.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, I went to her space today and I was floored because she has a storefront and it's like a library and everything in there is written by a Black woman. There's a lot of stuff in there. And it's sort of a thing that's needed in a whole lot of communities. But what made you think of that idea?
A couple of different things. One of them being that there's this line, I believe it's Toni Morrison, who says, if there's a book you want to read, you must write it.
Okay.
And I wanted to see something very specific that really centered Black women writers, and I wasn't finding it out in the world. So that was part of it. I was always a heavy reader and part of multiple book clubs, always following bestsellers lists, all these different things. And I always noticed that when it came to Black women writers, they weren't often included on these lists, like top 100 books, must-read books, greatest books of all time, all these different epic lists of like literature, iconic literature pieces. I would never see Black women's names on these lists, right? So it's 2024 now and things have changed, but this was in 2014. Okay. So things were very different then. The only name I would see would be like Toni Morrison, and that was it. So that was part of it. And the other part is that I was part of a lot of different like organizing, activism organizations, and we were doing work around state violence as far as like Black women victims. And I was attending different direct actions, like political meetings, all these different things. And it just felt very depressing, for lack of a better word. It felt very depleting emotionally on me. And I wanted to do something that centered Black women, but didn't give me that same feeling of victim, perpetual victim, right? Like whenever Black women are discussed in activist spaces, at least at this time, there was always a like, oh, we're struggling, we're dying, we're being harmed, we're being abused. Like there was always that kind of notion. It was always pathological. So that was getting to me, like just from a mental health, emotional health standpoint. So I decided to step away from that and figure out a new way to do work around Black womanhood, but not from a place of victim, more so from a place of like our brilliance, our creativity, the diversity, and books seem like the perfect place to start. So that's how the library came to be. I was like, I want to do something that centers Black women, where we're not victims, and where we are the focal point, but the perspective is more so like, look at this genius, look at this amazingness, right? So something that offered inspiration and like healing and a sense of like possibility, right? You see all these different books, all these different topics. It gives you a sense of pride. It gives you a sense of like, oh, maybe I could write a book, or maybe I could travel, or maybe I could do hair, or I could do fashion, like, or I could write poetry or romance. Maybe I could fall in love, like all these different things, because I wasn't getting those vibrations from the activist spaces. So that's how the library came to be. I first started it with 100 books. And it was a mobile library that I took all over New York City. And I would install the books in these different spaces, and then I would activate the space with a workshop or a performance or a reading or a talk. And the collection just started to grow from there. The initial goal was 100, but once I got to 100, I was like, this is not enough books because not enough stuff is being covered. So I continued to collect. I got to 300, to 1,000, to 3,000, to 5,000. Now I have over 5,000. And I got the storefront in 2021. So that the mobile part of the project doesn't happen in the same way. And there is a small part of me that misses the mobile aspect, because it was kind of a fun challenge to install the books in these different random spaces, like art galleries, museums, barbershops, clothing stores, community gardens. Figuring out a way to display the books and install the books was fun. But us having our own space means we can do whatever we want in the space. Whereas when I install the book in another space, I am required to meet the approval of the people who own that space as far as what can happen. So in our storefront, we can talk about anything and make anything and do anything, and we don't have to worry about anything. So yeah, so that's how the library came to be. I love libraries. I've always loved libraries. I used to cut school and go to the library in high school all the time. I'd be there all day, and they would let me sit in there all day and not bother me. So yeah, that's how it came to be. So what would you say to somebody who's interested in starting an artist collective? Like, how would you suggest they have a seamless, efficient process?
I don't know if it's going to be seamless. But the first thing is, usually collectors begin because there's a need or something is lacking. And then, like I said, one person's voice can be strong, but the voice of 2 or 3 or 10 or 20 or 50 is a lot more powerful. I would say don't be idealistic and thinking that everything is going to be smooth and pretty and all of that, because it's not. Because you're dealing with human beings. And what usually happens when you form a group is that at the beginning of the group, you have everybody showing up. As time goes on, a lot of those people tend to kind of like disappear, and you're always left with the core group. I think in any organization, even if you have 1,000 people, there's going to be 5 people who actually do the business of keeping that group alive. And as long as you know that, go for it, because collectives are great. they're like extended family. They're very focused on individual interests, so you find other people who are interested in the same thing as you are, and that's empowering to each individual because now you have somebody else who's doing the same thing, and together you put your energy together, and then you could do more. But there are going to be fights and arguments and disagreements and cussing out and slamming of the doors and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, you still have something.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Would you ever consider writing a book about your life?
I've thought about that about 100 times, but then I start thinking, well, and then I've started sometimes. What I actually did was tell my daughter, look, I got about 40 journals in the house, and there's 5 over there, there's 5 over there, there's a couple there. None of them are finished. When I'm gone, you can go through these books and see if you could make a book out of it. Because I've written books, and out of all the art forms that I've done, writing takes the most out of a human being. It also,
I concur.
I wrote, I think the last book I wrote was when my son was born. And I really, really had a hard time because in writing you need quiet time, you need time to focus, you need time to think. Having an infant around, that is not going to work. And so either you got to put a lot of money aside to get some babysitters, or something, you know, but I don't know, that's still open. I might actually do it, and then I might not. Because sometimes I think I like to leave this life as a mystery and let people figure out what I was doing when I'm gone, and hopefully be laughing on the other side. I have left footnotes.
Yeah. I recently had the chance to visit Intisaki Shange's archives at Barnard, and they have all of her journals there. And similar to in June, I went to Berea to visit Bell Hooks's archives. And one thing I noticed about both of their journals, because I'm very nosy, so that's the first thing I go for, I can barely read their handwriting.
Well, yeah, I'm going to be one of those.
But it's kind of exciting to see some of the journal entries for both women. It just it really turns them into human beings because, you know, we see them as these like, you know, figures that are larger than life, similar to yourself, and then you find out that they kind of had like, you know, romantic heartbreak and dealt with poverty, lights being turned off, all these different very human experiences. So it's it was special for me to see that, because it's like, okay, you can be a Black woman genius and still
have problems.
And
it doesn't make your life perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I'm going to read another one of Essie's questions. I mean, you took the time out to type them up and everything. So how do you see the work you do leading to this political moment? This political moment is very strange, but so has the rest of our political moments. Y'all don't remember, what was the name? Bull Connors and all them kind of people back from the 60s and 70s? It was Do y'all know who that
up
is?
in here. He
Bull
just
Connor.
was not a nice person.